Hello students, welcome to the cell chapter. Within this chapter we're going to be looking at, of course, the parts of the cell, and then kind of talk a little bit with some stuff that I would have talked about in the prior video about a little bit of the DNA, because obviously we're talking about the cell and where that DNA is going to live. So we're going to bring Manny in. Don't want to forget him. Says hello everybody. I'm not going to be using him as much for this video, so I know he'll be a little bit sad about that. But we're going to look at the cell and the microscopic of a cell. So definitely important to think when you're looking at the beginnings of the chapter, be thinking about, remember we talked about in chapter 1, introduction to the cells, we would have talked about the levels of organization. So when you're thinking about, again, those levels of organization, think about chemicals. So it would have been the last video. Those different chemicals come together to make a cell. So when we think about a cell, make sure you still understand that we're still talking about microscopic. Okay, just like the atoms and molecules that we can't see around us, okay, we got to get at a microscopic level. So that's, definitely important when you're thinking about looking at a cell. Of course, we'll talk about also with cells the differences that come structurally and functionally with cells. Cells will vary throughout the body. Now, cells are the most structural and functional, so the A and the P, units of any and all living matter. Sorry, Manny, you kind of fall out of that one. Okay, but when we think about anything that's living, we definitely think about the cells and the chemicals that make up those cells. Now, the cell structure is definitely going to reflect their specialized function. So, such as when you see pictures of the cells, you're going to see they don't all look the same. Okay, they're not going to all look like this chapter that I will relate to as a circle. Some of them are going to look, like almost like a scary monster. Some of them are going to look like little floats. When we talk about definitely looking at the red blood cells are an example, carrying oxygen around our body. Okay, so definitely not all cells are going to have the same parts. Okay, so it's something for you to definitely be thinking about as you get deeper into future videos. Okay, and I kind of course, will talk about those, structural parts that affects those cells and what they have and what they don't have. So definitely use the next diagram, okay, the little parts of this video, okay, that will help you to relate to the different parts and also within those parts the different functions. Okay, so we're going to be looking at three main parts. The one that you're going to spend and learn a lot more about would be in the middle. Okay, that middle second part is going to be where the organelles live. So definitely take some time, and watch this next part. That's going to help you to learn the different parts of the cell. So now we're going to talk about parts of the cell. And again, in this particular example, I'm going to use a plate to help us to make the cell. Now remember, cells can be different shapes and sizes, but just to kind of help you follow along with the textbook, going to be using a circle, okay, but remember it doesn't necessarily have to be a circle. It could be more kind of flattened, odd shape, especially when we talk about cells such as like cells of the nervous system. They're going to definitely look totally different. But remember, most of those cells will have the same parts. Some could have more or less of these pieces that we're going to use, and some could not even have them at all. Okay, but we definitely need to know what those parts do. So the main core part here is going to be on that plate. We're going to see a couple things. Okay, the first thing we're going to see is the outside, okay, of this plate is going to be what they call the plasma membrane. But when you think about the plasma membrane, definitely understand that the plasma membrane is not like, saran wrap. It has those channels that we'll see at the end of this chapter that is going to allow things to come and go from the cell. Okay, so the outside, even if you want to, I'm using like these pipe type cleaners and like little pom-poms, but you could definitely use like Play-Doh. Okay, just kind of look up online, Play-Doh cell, and then you could actually make the parts. Okay, so if you were to take Play-Doh, you could kind of put it around the edge itself. It allows things, again, to come and go from the cell. So again, three main parts we're going to look at. the outside, okay? Then before you get to the middle, in between here, and you could use like some glue or some gel if you want to, some slime, okay? I know slime's definitely fun to kind of play with, except for you may not like that stickiness and it gets all over the place. But think about between the outside and this thing in the middle is called the cytoplasm, okay? It's called the gel in the cell for a reason, okay? So if you wanted to, I'm not going to with mine because then it gets a little bit messy and then my hands get all nasty. But definitely thinking about that gel in the cell is cytoplasm, okay? It's where all these little pieces that we're going to place here in a minute are going to live, okay? These organelles that we're going to look at. And we'll look at too, there's some that you kind of saw over here, these pipe cleaners. We're going to put them also on the outside of the cell. And then the last part, the third main part of a cell, is this purple thing that you see here. In the middle, the nucleus, okay? Now the nucleus is going to hold that DNA. It is the brains of the operation, okay? Definitely make sure that this cell, if anything gets inside of that nucleus and controls it, then it controls that whole cell of what the cell is going to do or not do, okay? That's why we think about viruses. We'll eventually get to and talking about that with our pathologies here in a couple of videos, but definitely think about if things get in that cell, they can control the cell, and that's game changing, okay? That's where a lot of diseases unfortunately do come from. That cell nucleus goes awry, okay? It goes kind of cray-cray. Now, so let's go back to that very first one of the three main areas, the plasma membrane, okay? Now, plasma membrane can have some projections, okay? I'm going to kind of pull these to the side so we don't get kind of confused here. We'll do one of them, okay? Now, one of them that comes off of the cell is called the cilii or cilium, okay? So this little this is like finger-like projections. I know most textbooks kind of say they're short hairline projections that come from the cell. Okay, so with that, definitely be thinking about this is something that, like when we look at areas in our body that have the cells that have these, would be like in your respiratory tract. Okay, so when you cough, these little fingers will move, okay, and they'll help to propel the cell moving and along. Okay, so think of it like a conveyor belt in some ways. Now, another example would be this one here. Okay, we'll kind of put it over to also to the side, called a microvilla or villus. Okay, so the microvilla or villus, these ones are going to be ones, instead of like moving things along, they're the ones that's going to, again, suck things in. They're about absorption. Okay, we're going to talk about villus within our small intestine. So when food goes by, it's going to suck it in to the cell, do some of that endocytosis. Okay, so again, it's a projection that comes off the cell plasma membrane. Now, one more example, okay, and you're only going to find this in a sperm. Okay, kind of move this over, and it'd be a lot bigger. It's called the flagella. Okay, the flagella or flagellum is going to be the tail that comes off a sperm. Okay, so the only example of this projection that you're going to see coming off that cell membrane is going to be in a sperm. Okay, it'll be a long time, many videos from now that we'll actually get to talk about that one. So know the three main projections, things that come off of that cell membrane that allows things to either the cell to kind of move along, absorb, or kind of propel it in a sperm, okay, itself. Now, after that, okay, let's look at, we talked about the nucleus. So let's kind of go back to the nucleus a second. Again, the nucleus is where the DNA is held. There is a membrane, an envelope that protects the nucleus. So again, many walls to get through, but definitely that's important because the DNA is held there. Okay, so there are, of course, a couple little parts you'll actually see. Not that it's not a big deal, but the nucleolus is going to make something that's going to help in that's around it, okay, to do something. So let's kind of throw some of these pieces in here, okay? So I'm kind of pick a bigger one here for it, of a thing called the mitochondria. Okay, so the mitochondria is not in the nucleus, it's not outside the cell, it's in the cell, and this mitochondria is the powerhouse. Now, if you want to use something, maybe put it like a little house, get you the Monopoly game and kind of put a house piece there, might also kind of help you. But the powerhouse of the cell, okay, it's going to manufacture. We think about it's going to help with the ATP. Okay, so when glucose gets in, okay, we'll see the absorbing one, when the glucose gets in to the cell, okay, it's going to go hopefully straight for the mitochondria, and that's where you're definitely going to see that extra energy is going to be made for the cell, okay, the mitochondria. Now, The next part we're going to look at, and I'll kind of pick a yellow one here, is the ribosomes. Okay, so the ribosomes are actually made inside the nucleus. Okay, there's a part that makes them, but then as they're made, they go and they spend the rest of their time in that cytoplasm, and the ribosomes are the ones that manufacture, or what some books actually say is synthesize proteins. Okay, so they're the workers, they're the factory. You get a little video that you can kind of see to the side, or if you don't, I definitely highly encourage you to find something also on YouTube to help you learn these organelles within it. Okay, some type of song to kind of help you. Okay, but this one again, this ribosome is going to help to assemble those little Lego pieces together to help the cell to know what it needs to do. Okay, eventually, of course, that message has to get outside of the cell. Okay, so the ribosomes like to live, and I'm going to kind of use this one here to kind of help us. They like to live in this piece. Okay, I gotta move our nucleus over just a little bit, even though it's usually in the middle. And they like to live, a lot of these ribosomes, inside of this winding membrane sac, a endoplasmic reticulum, which is just, again, it's just a winding that goes to the nucleus. Lots of those ribosomes like to live in the part that's called the rough, R for R, rough. Ribosomes like to live there. So as messages leave the nucleus and need to get to the outside, these ribosomes are going to assemble those pieces. Okay, inside a lot of them. No, you can have some free floating ones, and I'll put just kind of another one over here. So again, some of them like to kind of free float too, so I kind of throw that one there so you can kind of see it. So definitely, understand that they can be and help assemble, but more of them like to live within this ER. Okay, so definitely when you're thinking about it. So I'll kind of pull this one out so it's not confusing as totally, but those are the ribosomes. Now what they do, they manufacture, they synthesize proteins. Okay, so think of them as a factory worker within that ER. Okay, now you do have some smooth part. I'm not going to get into this video, but there is some smooth that doesn't have ribosomes within the sac. They help to process the other types of foods that we eat. Okay, so definitely just kind of, when you're reading that week, you're definitely going to see it within your textbook. Now, near that, and I'll kind of just use a different color here to kind of help us, you actually are going to have another kind of winding sac of membranes, and this one is going to transfer that information before it leaves the cell. It's actually going to connect up to, and I'll kind of rechange the way that this kind of looks a little bit here so you can kind of see it a little bit better, is that ribosome that's in here, once it makes the message, it's going to transfer that information to the darker pink. And I connect it up there so you can kind of see it. So as that is going to go outside, this Golgi apparatus is going to be the part that helps like the quality control. Okay, it's going to make sure that whatever the message that the ribosome assembled within that ER, that the message is correct. And if it's not correct, then it's going to be eaten. Okay, it's going to be destroyed, and then the process has to start all over again. So think about those Lego pieces. If we're trying to make a car, but it looks like a cat, well, that's not going to be good. Okay, so that's what the purpose of the Golgi apparatus. It also helps to truly get things outside the cell that are correct, okay, itself. So know those two kind of winding sacs, and know those couple extra parts there. Now, there are some little tiny guys. Okay, I kind of put them in here. These here are called the somes. Okay, not the ribosomes, so lyosomes and Perex type of somes. These are the digestive bags. Okay, so lyosomes are going to be like little Pac-Man that go along and munch, munch, munch. Okay, so maybe we'll do a red for stop, and then they're like, oh, there's a virus that comes into that cytoplasm. They're going to come up and engulf it and eat it. Okay, so definitely know they're a different type of sum. Don't confuse them with the rhizomes. Those are the ones that assemble those other sums that you're going to see within your list of these organelles I need to know. Those are the ones that do phagocytosis. Okay, they help to destroy things, keep the cell safe, okay, when you're thinking about it. Now, some other things that you'll have within that cell, you could also have, in a lot of cells, you will have these rods. Okay, and I kind of put a couple of them here so you can kind of see them. These rods are going to relate to division of the cell. Okay, you'll see that kind of in most textbooks, especially this textbook I'm working with, you're definitely going to see that they're going to help with that mitosis. Okay, so cell division. Okay, so they're kind of rods that are in there. So as the message gets there, they will divide and allow one cell to become two daughter cells itself. So as you can see, a lot of different organelles, a lot of different parts I know we need to know within the cell. Again, have some fun with it. Again, make some Play-Doh. If you want to use these little, pieces, you definitely can. But you got to know definitely what the cell parts are and what the cell does with those parts. Okay, how does it use those parts? So hopefully that was helpful to you. Again, do something, whether it be, working with, I did different parts there. You could work with Play-Doh, you could work with foods, okay? I've had students before that have taken gelatin, clear gelatin, and added different fruits and stuff in it. I've had students that have made pizzas, so definitely find something that works for you. Now, one thing I want to point out again about when I talked about that plasma membrane, the cell membrane that encases the cell, that is actually made out of fats, which is lipids. There are a couple things that you will definitely notice in this textbook of the types of proteins that are on that cell plasma membrane. Now, there are channels, okay, so these are pores in the membranes that allows very certain substances, such as different ions, and we were talked about in the video before, to allow to come into. Okay, that passive versus active transporting that we're going to talk about next. Now, there's transporters. Like kind of the name kind of says what it does. It's a protein on that cell membrane that can change its shape and allow and shift or shuttle substances such as like glucose across the membrane. So it kind of carries it from one side to the other. There's receptors. Okay, I would have already talked about receptors in prior videos. Definitely, back to homeostasis, think of receptor is receiving information. Okay, these allow for the attachments of substances such as hormones, when you get to the endocrine system, to the plasma membrane. Okay, it allows it to basically kind of stick there. Okay, so things can eventually come and go. Enzymes, okay, we would have talked about enzymes in the prior video. Remember, they're catalysts, they speed up things. Okay, so these participate in reactions at the membrane. Okay, so they attach, okay, allow things to exchange. Okay, now the other ones would be linkers. Okay, linkers help stabilize the plasma membrane and attach cells together. So like, hence the name, they link together. And then the last one, which will make a lot more sense when we talk about the immunity, cell identify markers. So these you definitely can think of when we think of our blood types. Definitely, these are proteins that are unique to a person's cell, very important in the immune system, and transporting of tissue from one person to the next. So definitely look at that, charts of these different proteins that will be in that plasma membrane will be very, very important. Now, the next thing we want to talk about is things moving using that plasma membrane. So just as like Manee swimming to the next channel that he wants to be in. Okay, so from point A to point B. Okay, he wants to get there, but let's say there is something blocking him, which we're going to be definitely thinking about that plasma, that cell membrane. Now, one thing to definitely point out is we talked about it in chapter 1, that the importance of those barriers. Okay, so again, those gradients we kind of talked about. Okay, again, back to that kind of that first video. Barriers, okay, allow a barrier between the cell and the outside environment. Okay, remember, every cell in our body has a liquid, an environment, a matrix that's around it. So nutrients and oxygen and substances needed to be taken in by the cell, or waste that needs to be removed. Okay, things that don't need to be hanging out in the cell. Now, that plasma membrane, again, remember, is very semi-permeable, meaning that it's very selective of what comes and goes. Okay, so that's important to understand. Now, water, that molecule, that compound can go wherever it's got the VIP pass. Okay, that's who you want to be best friends in to get into the club. Okay, because the bouncer's not going to stop it. Now, there are two different types of processes as far as moving things in and out of the cell. The first one requires no energy. Okay, now energy, remember, we're talking about ATP. It's that chemical energy that the cell uses, gets it from glucose, goes to that mitochondria to make that energy. So passively relies on the kinetic energy of the particles themselves. So the cell does not have to do any type of work whatsoever. Now, there's going to be several different types that we're going to look at. Okay, so the first type is diffusion. Okay, so diffusion, again, think of putting a tea in a tea bag. Okay, if you leave that tea bag in the water long enough, it becomes tea. Okay, the high to low concentration. Okay, definitely that you will see in a little step-by-step to help you. Okay, with that. So again, definitely be thinking about diffusion examples outside of the illustration I'm going to give you within the body, okay, itself. The second type will be osmosis. Now, osmosis is diffusion of just water, okay? So it's movement across water or across into wherever it wants to go through. These aquaporins, as they're called. And then lastly would be filtration. Okay, now there is an extra diffusion that you will see. The other one can be facilitated. It's just kind of a helper, okay, that it helps, especially when we talk about glucose, but it's still diffusion. Now the difference between diffusion and filtration uses a pressure, okay, itself. So definitely be thinking about examples within the body. Now watch the next little part here to help you kind of visualize what that would look like outside of the body. So this is a great example that you can use. Just get you some Nerds candy, get you a couple plates, and then you notice I sprinkled some of that Nerds candy inside the 2 plates, and then I sprinkled some of the Nerds candy outside of the plates. So this is a good way to kind of help you to understand what this is about. Now, we're talking about cells, okay? So we're talking about the cells and things getting inside of the cell and things getting outside of the cell. So you'll notice on one plate, the plate over to one side here, to this side, has more candies than this side has. So we're going to look at an example of passive versus active. Okay, passive is when you have more and it goes from a higher number to a lower number. Okay, so fold these over like so. Now, that is a passive exchange. Now, some of those things would be diffusion. And think of a tea bag with diffusion, okay? I gave kind of that example earlier. Filtration is the other one. Filtration, definitely think of that example I gave, but filtration would be more like adding pressure to diffusion. Osmosis, that deals with water precisely. Definitely use that example I gave earlier. And then the other one definitely be thinking about now is going to be dialysis. Okay, we'll come to dialysis later, like I mentioned earlier when we talk about the kidneys. So from a high number to a low number, and that's constantly happening over through our body. The cell does not have to do anything. Okay, obviously you kind of saw me do it. Okay, but high to low. Okay, and it could be outside of the cell. Okay, so I'll pick some of these nerds up here, putting it in the cell from a high number to a low number. Okay, so it can happen between cells, obviously, but it also mostly happens on the outside, going inside of a cell. Exchanging of these little ions. Okay, remember these little ions? The reason I used the Nerds candy earlier, because those ions, again, they can come together, clump together, such as like those Nerds gummies. So hopefully that kind of helped you. So examples you're going to see for diffusion within the body was when we breathe. So all of these high numbers of these molecules, okay, oxygen needs to get into my lungs, and once it gets in my lungs, it gets to these little things called the alveolus, okay, which we'll eventually get to in future videos, but the little air sacs, okay, around that air sac is going to be some capillaries, okay, that touch, okay, that's where the exchanging is going to occur between the high number here and the low number that's within our body. That's diffusion. That cell, that little alveolus, those little cells within it, don't have to do anything. Okay, so from a high number to a low number, and of course vice versa, from a high number of carbon dioxide to a low number. Okay, that exchanging itself. Filtration, you definitely want to relate to thinking about our blood pressure. Okay, the force of our heart is going to allow, as that oxygen and water is flowing through these tubes, okay, our arteries and veins, okay, even our capillaries, that pressure is eventually going to push a high concentration of water, per se, to where the low concentration is at. Okay, so definitely remember, passive is always a high gradient to a low gradient. Okay, that is definitely important. And then you also will see within a passive, you'll also see what they call tonicity. Tonicity is going to relate to different types of solution. Okay, so one of them being isotonic, okay, solution would be no change, no gain or loss. Okay, so an isotonic solution means, of course, iso means the same. Okay, so the solution is the same type of concentration. Now, a hypotonic solution, lower than, okay, so definitely think about a lot of water, okay, versus salt, okay, that might kind of help you. That's going to cause all this. Think about if you put too much water, it's going to flood, okay, and by doing that, it floods the cells, and that eventually causes the cells to swell. Especially an example would be the red blood cell living in a hypotonic solution. That's going to cause an exploding to happen. Okay, they also call it hemolysis, means to burst. Okay, hemo, of course, blood. When we get to that eventually, but kind of talking and looking in it now is important. And lysis, okay, lysis word, of course, means to burst. Okay, so that's why, again, you have to think about the hypos and the hypers. Now, a hypertonic solution, example, was a very concentrated salt solution. Okay, so think about if like a shrinkage, okay, that it would occur. Okay, so if I put a red blood cell in a hypertonic solution, too much salt, it's going to cause that cell to shrink up, and of course it's eventually cause the cell to die. So definitely look at tonicity. Okay, again, tonicity is relating to the type of concentration of substances that the cell is living in. Okay, what benefit would it give to that cell? Now the next type is an active. Okay, so passive is one, active is the other. Okay, so again, the examples of the active, pumps, and the other one would be what they call kind of the main category of vesicular transporting. Okay, better known as the cytosis. Endo, bringing things into the cell. Active means it needs its energy. Okay, so pumps, think about when I'm pumping something up, okay, that have to use energy. If I'm the cell, I have to use energy. If I want to pull something in or push something out, that's going to take energy from the cell. So those would be the cytosis. So endo brings it in. Two different names you'll see with that would be phagocytosis. Okay, phago means to eat. Pinocytosis means to drink. Okay, so the cell, we're going to really see this when we get to the white blood cells and how they work within the body. Exocytosis is getting it out of the cell. So endo's in, the X belongs on the outside. Okay, now active, remember, is different than passive. It's from a low concentration gradient to a high concentration. Okay, so that's very important to always remember. It takes energy. Okay, the cell has to use energy for that. Active. Okay, active is a low number to a high number. Okay, now that takes a pushing, okay, or a pumping, or pulling, as it's called within your book, or it could be a cytosis. Okay, so endo and exo. Okay, so the X belongs on the outside. Okay, the X belongs on the outside. Endo is bringing it in. So like our phago and our pinocytosis with that. So from a low number to a high number. Okay, that takes work. The cell would have to work in order to do that. Okay, get all of it, maybe most of the pieces out, or the same thing, force some of these pieces out. It's an active. The cell has to do something. Okay, it has to push it, pull it. Okay, pushing it, pulling it in and out. And then we think about if there's maybe kind of example that you will have seen with the cell of, again, the phago and pinocytosis is we think about the eating and the drinking. Okay, the eating and the drinking. So there's some stuff here, okay, that the cell wants to exchange with this cell. So it's going to, again, you use its energy, its ATP, to get it over to this side itself. Or there's something on the outside of the cell that the cell wants, and it's going to reach in and grab it and consume it, such as we'll see eventually with our white blood cells. They definitely do. They're phagocytic cells, meaning that they're going to do a lot of eating, a lot of consuming within our body. So definitely use the Nurse candies, help you. Okay, and then they're delicious too. You can eat them later. So that is the examples of transporting mechanisms within the body. Now, one thing to remember in this chapter, It definitely talks again, because remember the DNA lives in the nucleus. The nucleus is the control center. Okay, within that we have this thing called protein synthesis, is relating to like building something. Okay, so remember that protein synthesis, remember what did it? Okay, the ribosomes. So ribosomes are definitely playing a role in our life, okay, as a whole, as the DNA. Okay, because proteins play such a, important part of our body, A and P. We need to definitely understand the cellular substances that direct the production of what the proteins even look like when the body's consuming them, of how we're assembling those individual amino acids. So each part of our body for hereditary is governed by the cell. Okay, and those are held deep within the nucleus. Now, if you kind of break the nucleus apart, okay, and look very deep at the core, okay, itself, you're going to find, of course, we think about that nucleotide. So remember the nucleotide that I talked about before, that part of it is nitrogen base, a phosphate unit, and a sugar unit. Okay, they must be assembled properly to give that nucleotide, which is, of course, our DNA. Now within that we find a chromosome. Now each chromosome then is individual little units called your genes. And I think most of us we look at that ladder and we think about our genes. Chromosomes, genes, those are going to, of course, give you your personality, give you your hair color, your eye color, all that good stuff. Okay, or genetical diseases that we end up with passed down through the line. Okay, so when we talk about DNA, remember all that information is related back to how the arrangement was given by those ribosomes. Now remember, those ribosomes then have to, carry that information, okay? So again, that process of DNA and protein synthesis is it has to be arranged a certain way. And now that message then again has to be relayed. Now there's two different ways we think about relating that message. One of them is transcribing, okay, and one of them is translation. So when you think about those names alone, transcribing means I'm writing something down. So you think about, okay, if I'm writing something down and I wrote it so sloppy that the next person can't read it, well, then something can get lost in translation, and that's where, of course, a mutation could also occur. The other way we think about translation, well, we know certain words, when you translate them into different languages, okay, so such as you took English or vice versa from other languages, it doesn't always transcribe the same, does it? Okay, so it could be again like me whispering something to somebody and they translating it one way, misunderstanding, and then it gets to the end of the line and then it's misunderstood. Now, mutations can come that way, or mutations, of course, can come from, of course, chemicals, environments that we live around us, okay, itself. A lot of, unfortunately, later chapters when we get into, of course, true hereditary problems, a lot of chemicals environment cause a lot more issues than the body itself. But those mutations did come from, originally, probably did come from something we're consuming or the air and stuff we're breathing. Kind of environmental factors. But again, some genetics can kind of skip generations and then go farther down the line. So definitely know what the role is. The key players, okay, so nucleus is very important. Okay, within the nucleus, that's where the ribosomes are even made, the little workers that are going to assemble that. And of course, that message then is eventually carried outside of the cell. Okay, so that's where you get into that messenger RNA. The R standing for ribosomes. Okay, it's a messenger that helps to carry the message. Hopefully nothing gets lost in transcribing that message and then eventually the translation of that message. Okay, and again, that is all controlled by those individual amino acids being assembled into hopefully the right protein itself. Now, the last part you'll see in this chapter talks about cell division. Okay, so two different parts that definitely need to be thinking about when we think about, again, that's carrying that message out of the cell and making more of me. Okay, so if I have a nucleus and I have a DNA, and remember, not all cells are going to have the DNA, okay, or not going to have a nucleus. So with that said, if a cell misses and does not have a nucleus, it cannot reproduce. Okay, so when you think about cell division, definitely think about reproducing. So there are two different main processes. There's mitosis and meiosis. Okay, so kind of the differences between these. Okay, I'll talk with the one that we're going to spend the most about, which would be the process of mitosis. Okay, so mitosis, or every cell that has a nucleus, except for the sex cells. Okay, so when we get to the sperm and the egg eventually, okay, every other cell will go through the process of mitosis. Okay, so where one stem cell, the parent, gives rise to two identical daughter cells in that process of protein synthesis. Okay, and there's different phases. There's actually 4 phases that you'll see in that cell division: the prophase, the metaphase, the anaphase, and the telophase. Okay, within those phases, you're definitely going to see those rods that are having to kind of split. Okay, and then information then aligns, the chromosomes align in the middle. Okay, then they eventually separate, and we go from having 46 same numbers given. Okay, that message is carried over to 2 identical cells. Okay, that process of new cells during the last interface of that cell division itself. Now, meiosis, okay, is the gametes. Now, the gametes, or the game plan, as I call it, would be a sperm cell and an egg. Okay, and I'm not going to get into it within this video. Will be in a future video, but that's where, again, the chromosome number has to change, okay, to prepare for the union of the egg and the sperm during fertilization. Now, remember, any cell within the body has, unfortunately, that potential of a good cell gone bad. So, like, what's a good cell gone bad? Unfortunately, we relate that name to cancer. Okay, so when we think about cancer and we think about the cells are always aging. Okay, unfortunately, as a person ages, those stem cells divide less frequently. Okay, so we go from the 1 to the 2, and the mature body cells become less active. These changes, of course, then slow down the repair of the body. It relies on the production of new cells, the substances from those existing cells. So an example would be like one of your bone fractures. It will take longer to heal in someone that's older versus younger. Okay, so that process of mitosis is not as fast, unfortunately, as we age. Now, certain mutations can happen, changes, remember, within the cell and that protein synthesis that will cause the cell to reproduce, divide without any control. Okay, so almost view it like, kind of a weird thought of it. It's like a rabbit just having babies all the time. Okay, and before you know it, you have 2, 4, 20, 80, 100 rabbits like in no time. Okay, rabbits are kind of known for how quickly they go through their reproducing. So cells that normally multiply at a fast rate, such as your skin, okay, be an example of that, are more likely than a slower growing cell to undergo those transformations. So cancer can come from, of course, different factors. We think about hereditary, that sometimes are passed down through more generations. Chemicals, these carcinogens that are common in our society that can also, of course, cause cancer to come about. We think about being overweight, obesity, of course, physical inactivity, poor nutrition, and any type of course, infections, viruses and stuff that we'll see in the next video when we talk about these agents that can kind of set up and take hold of the nucleus. So remember, when we're thinking about things like cancer and these cells within our body, it's something has gone awry within the nucleus, within that DNA, and is telling that cell that it needs to work all the time and not at a certain pace. Okay, and that's when it is, of course, when you think about then those cells need blood, then they take blood from the organs that need that blood, and that's how, of course, those masses unfortunately get bigger and bigger. So within this chapter, hopefully, I've given you some good little parts of this video that will help you to kind of visualize. Definitely, make sure you're doing some hands-on stuff to learn this material as you are reading it within your textbook. So sorry, Manny, I didn't use you very much for this video. He's like, that's okay. You'll use me for more videos. But I hope you all have a great week, and I will see you all within the next video.